In this movie, we'll establish a base gradient, and that's going to be this blue gradient inside the planet that grows darker toward the top, thereby indicating the transition from sky to space. So I'll go ahead and switch over to our document so far. And the first thing we need to do is verify that we're working in a color-managed space. So drop down to this right-pointing arrowhead next to the word selection, at least that's what it says by default. And then click on it, choose Show, and choose Document Color Profile. And you should now see Adobe RGB 1998 in parentheses. If you don't, if you see sRGB, then go up to the Edit menu, choose Color Settings, and then change your RGB working space setting to Adobe RGB, and click OK. In my case, everything's fine, so I'll just go ahead and cancel out. All right, the next thing we want to do is get a bead on that Pantone 285 blue so that we can more or less match it. And to do that, just go ahead and double-click on that swatch there inside the swatches panel. The color mode will be set to book color by default. We want to change it for the moment. We're not going to make any permanent changes here. But for now, go ahead and switch it to HSB. And that way we can get a sense for the hue, which is about 213 degrees. So it's in that wonderful 210-degree blue territory, which is all we really need to concern ourselves with. Also note that we have a pretty saturated color, almost 80%, and it's pretty bright as well. So with that in mind, I'm just going to go ahead and cancel out here. And now I'm going to click on my black planet here on the gradients layer in order to select it. And I'm going to fill it with a gradient by going up to the window menu and choosing the gradient command to bring up the gradient panel. And you want to go ahead and expand that panel as well by clicking on that double arrow icon a couple of times. And then, assuming that your fill is active, then just go ahead and click either on this gradient in the upper left corner or on the gradient bar in order to fill the planet with the default gradient. Now let's go ahead and change that type to radial like so. And I'm going to scroll to the very bottom of the layers panel here and turn on my guides once again so that I can see this little rectangular guide that represents the center of the exhaust plume. And now I'm going to select my gradient tool, which you can get by pressing the G key. And I'm going to drag from this location, the center of this rectangular guide, all the way up to this anchor point right there at the top of the planet. And then I'll release. And with any luck, that will change the angle to 60 degrees. And I just happened to nail it this time around. If you don't, if it says 59 and change or 60 and change or what have you, just go ahead and change this angle value to exactly 60 degrees. All right, now I'm going to change the end color from black to a shade of blue. So I'll go ahead and double-click on that color stop in order to bring up this color panel. And make sure, by the way, that the color icon is selected. You don't want to be working with swatches. And then click on this little flyout menu icon and switch your color set to HSB. Then you can modify your settings to taste. And notice that Illustrator has already thrown in a hue value of 213 degrees for me. I'm going to take that down, however, to 210 degrees. And then I'll take the saturation value all the way up to 100%, and I'll take the brightness value down to 50%. So typically, when you're trying to create vivid, dark colors, you want to crank up that saturation value as you bring the brightness value down. Now, don't worry about the fact that Illustrator is going to round things off to 50.2 degrees in my case, which happens to be the nearest RGB equivalent. All right, now go ahead and click off the panel to hide it, and then go ahead and double-click on this first color swatch here, the one that's white. Notice that it's currently set to 0% K, that is 0% black. We want instead HSB. So you just want to switch to your HSB values. Nothing else really matters. The hue value of 210 degrees is fine. Saturation of 0 is very important, and a brightness value of 100% is very important as well. All right, now I'm going to create a new color stop right about there, let's say, just by clicking underneath the gradient bar. And I actually want the location to be 33%, so I'll just go ahead and dial in that value right there. And then I'll double-click on the color stop, and I'm going to switch from RGB to HSB once again, just because it's an easier way to work. And I'll stick with my hue value of 210 degrees. I'm going to take the brightness value all the way up to 100% this time, which means that instead of going with a saturation value of 100%, which is just too garish, I'm going to take that saturation value down slightly to 77%. Let's say, just because it's memorable and easy to enter, and it looks great as well. All right, now what I want to do is see the gradient inside the planet without the Earth covering things up. So I'll go ahead and scroll up a little bit here so I can see the gradients layer here inside the layers panel. And then I'll twirl that layer open by clicking on a triangle And I'll turn off that compound path right there so that all we're seeing on screen is the planet. And now notice that when you have the gradient tool active, you can hover over the gradient annotator here inside the document window. And I can actually drag the color stops around directly inside of the shape. And notice if I drag that white color stop upward, then I add a little bit of blast to that exhaust plume. What I want to do, though, is take this guy back down a little bit to a location of 10%. So I just went ahead and double-clicked on that color stop, and now I'm changing that location value like so. And now I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac in order to make that change. And now I'm going to switch back to the black arrow tool by pressing the V key, and I'm going to click off the shape to deselect it. And I'm also going to scroll down my list here inside the Layers panel and turn off my guides so I can get a real sense for how the logo looks.